Hello everyone, welcome to episode 11 of Daddy's Chats, and this is the long requested return. He's already gone laughing at the name every time. This is the long requested return of Aidan Mattis, and today we will be debating or discussing Atlantis and its validity. But we will be starting off with Owain Glyndŵr, who I've probably butchered the name of there. But would you like to introduce yourself now?
Sure. I will convince you about Atlantis, by the way. And to be clear, before we all go off in the, he's going to talk about the Rashat structure. It's the opposite. No. Bright Insight is wrong. He is incorrect. And he's been on Joe Rogan, making my job harder. So once I get to go on Joe Rogan, I can correct the record about Atlantis. So I'm Aidan Mattis. I am the host of a YouTube channel and podcast called The Lore Lodge. Ryan and I met on TikTok back in probably 2021.
I think it was my Alexander video, and it was one of the first Alexander videos I did.
Yeah, that was. I've been around for a while. I feel like there's definitely a community of people who started on TikTok who are moving over to podcasting and YouTube and all that in a certain space, and it's been fun to watch, especially being one of the people to come out of that who's a little bit bigger now and be able to throw the weight around and hey, everybody go follow this guy too. Like,
I think it's partially because TikTok treats creators awfully.
Oh god, it's horrible. It really has inspired like this camaraderie between content creators who are like, well, I hate TikTok, but I like these people.
100%.
But yeah, to get back into the actual topic that we're talking about, though, I do have to correct your pronunciation, even though I'm going to pronounce it wrong this entire time, too. Owain Glyndŵr. Owain Glyndŵr. It's hard for me to not put the H in between the W there, because I'm so used to German. But yeah, Owain Glyndŵr. Owain Glyndŵr. Yeah, it's...
Owain Glyndŵr, okay.
So in Welsh, W can have either a vowel sound or its typical W sound. So it can either be an U sound or a W, kind of like an actual, if you put two U's together, like vacuum. You would pronounce
it's like when you have the two L's in the,
It's similar to vacuum, but of course with a bit of a Welsh accent to it. So I mean, this is one of my favorite medieval topics ever. Not because it had far-reaching effects on society. It basically was this incredible little thing that happened that affected nothing about the world. But
he is your Alexander. He is who you use him for.
Well, he's kind of this King Arthur figure almost.
Isn't there a myth that he would return as well?
So we don't know when or where or how he died. So there's mythology that suggests that, like Arthur, he's one of these Brythonic kings waiting to return when the Welsh need them most. He has some similar mythology to Arthur. And what you need to understand here is that Wales, first of all, the term Wales comes from an Old English word meaning foreigner, which is the most ironic thing. To come into a country and then start referring to the native inhabitants as foreigners. But yeah, so these people, they call themselves the Cymry. This is kind of like the eternally unconquerable land. Nobody had successfully tamed Wales until about 1536 that it's finally integrated into the Kingdom of England in a full way, that it's no longer a principality that is controlled as a vassal state, but when it's finally adopted into the United Kingdom as it would become in 1536, I want to say, that's the first time that Wales has truly, genuinely been conquered. And that marks thousands and thousands of years of history of nobody really ever conquering this land. Of course, the Celts came in and displaced whoever the natives were before that, the Beaker peoples. But after that, it was just kind of Celtic groups fighting over it, and there was very rarely a full king of Wales. And when in 1400 you finally get to Owain Glyndŵr, you have somebody who, despite taking over most of Wales, taking the crown, essentially being king of Wales, he chooses to refer to himself as prince. Because the Welsh don't like the term king.
It's very similar to the Romans aren't very keen on the term of king.
It was actually a tradition descended from the Romans.
Oh, really?
They would use, yes. So one thing that a lot of people, and I didn't get this totally until college, the Welsh are, of course, Celts.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this kind of artificial line drawn between the Picts and the Cymry.
Yes.
The Cymry being the ones who lived under Roman rule. Technically, all of them would be the Cymry, because the term just means we the people. And they also had the term Prydain, which is where the term Britain comes from. That's what they told the Greeks and the Romans when they got there. This land is called Prydain. That also just means our land.
Because that's if you play like Imperator Rome stuff, it becomes Britannia, and then over time it became Britannia. So that's it's weird how the etymology of the word evolved.
The Roman word I believe was Britanni. The first word they used to refer to the island. But yeah, so I mean this is hundreds, thousands of years of just fighting off invasion forces. And then around the time that the Wars of the Roses are starting to spin up,
House of York for the win.
That actually would have been the same side as Glyndŵr.
Really?
He fought. Yes. So this is where it gets really interesting. I think I might be wrong. But I believe Henry IV and V were Lancaster, right?
I believe
Plantagenet?
Yes. I believe because Henry VII is the Tudor, so he's the return, and you've got Henry VI. It's Edward IV, I believe. I should know this. I really did like. Yeah, it's Edward IV, I believe, who's the Plantagenet king.
Yeah. So Henry IV and V were actually at one point in this war. There's a civil war that goes on. Like this entire episode is so interesting, but it all centers around. Obviously, there's the politics in England, but the Welsh side of the story centers around a guy named Owain. And he's born sometime between 1349 and 1359. We actually don't even know his birth date. But he's born into one of the only remaining Welsh noble houses that hasn't been completely just driven into poverty. He's part English, in a minor way. At this point, the Welsh and the English have been interbreeding for a while. But he's educated.
Is this a bit like how Robert the Bruce is a little bit English as well?
It's a similar idea. At one point, Owen actually reaches out to the King of Scotland, referring to him as a cousin. But that is a reference to the Welsh being the sons of Camber and the Scots being the sons of Albanicus. Right? So they're all sons of Brutus. But yeah, so he's born to a guy named Gruffydd Feichen of Powys Farog, which is northern Powys, and he marries Helen Verch Thomas, who is from Cardiganshire. And the quote I took back when I wrote the paper was from a scholar named Lloyd, who is a phenomenal scholar of Welsh history. The quote is that the eldest son of this union could reasonably claim to be regarded as the lawful successor not only of the rulers of northern Powys, but also those of South Wales and Dynefwr. So Owen's birthright, should he choose to try and make the claim, was to all of Wales. He could reasonably claim to be king of all Wales. Now, of course, things had changed because in 1282 there was the rebellion of Llewellyn the Last, and he lost. So things changed, and then you get the Statutes of Rhuddlan. So for a long time, Wales had been sort of just this. It was kind of a backwater. The English controlled it for the most part. They finally actually do conquer it in the 12th century, or in the 11th, 13th century. It really they have control over the majority of Wales. In 1282, a guy named Dafydd ap Gruffydd starts a war. He's the younger brother of the Prince of Wales, Llewellyn the Last, Llewellyn ap Gruffydd, and Dafydd starts the war against Edward Longshanks, loses the war against Edward Longshanks, and the Welsh nobility is crushed. The king, the prince, and his brother are both executed, and then finally we get the Statute of Rhuddlan. Now, what's the Statute of Rhuddlan? It basically made it illegal to be Welsh.
Okay.
Yeah, so among the claims, you got Edward, by the grace of Edward, by the grace of God, King of England, Lord of Ireland, and Duke of Aquitaine, to all his subjects in his land of Snowdon, and of his other lands in Wales, hath now wholly and entirely transferred under our proper dominion the land of Wales with its inhabitants. In short, That means that Wales is part of Edward's personal domain. It's not protected by English laws.
Wow.
Yeah, it is his person, and that's why to this day, the heir to the British crown is the Prince of Wales. The idea that developed during the Middle Ages was that whoever the heir was going to be, well, Wales, we don't care about them. They're not even really people. So go and rule them and figure out how to rule. And then when I die, you can come be king of England, was the idea.
I mean, I suppose...
And it's not a terrible idea.
Yeah, in a way, it's like, hey, if you, like, can look after these people well, then you get everyone well. But it, like most good ideas, it's never good in practice.
Yeah. So it created all of the modern shires in Wales.
Yeah.
Flintshire, Anglesey, Carnarvonshire, Merionethshire, Cardiganshire, and Carmarthenshire. All of these were created by Edward Longshanks. So what does that mean 150 years later? When Owen's born, Wales is basically just the domain of the English king. Owen is educated in London. Now keep in mind, the Statute of Rhuddlan makes it illegal to speak Welsh in church. It makes it illegal for Welsh people to own land in England. It makes it illegal for Welsh people to own businesses in England. It is, if you look at the Statute of Kilkenny that gets put on Ireland the next century, it's extremely similar. It's basically a cultural genocide. They don't want to kill the Welsh. They don't want to get rid of them. They want to destroy Welsh culture and language and then eventually just outbreed them. They're not trying to commit a violent round them up and kill them genocide. It's a slowly, there are more of us than there are of them. Eventually we can get rid of them, and it's still not technically killing other Christians. So Owen is educated in London as a lawyer. He gets his legal education in London. He is the eldest son in his family. He is the heir to the modest fortune that his family possesses. And then he goes off and he fights in Richard II's wars and in Henry IV's wars and in the wars where they are on the same side. So he's a captain of the army in Ireland and in Scotland and suppressing various rebellions here and there. I forget it. I don't think he ever fought in France, but I might just not remember it.
I never realized he fought so hard, like with the English. I always assumed he came up. But again, I suppose that's ironically a parallel to Washington in a way, because Washington fought for the English at one point.
Very similar story where, because Owen he fights as a squire for both Richard II and Henry IV.
That's insane.
He never fights against Richard II. To be clear, he is loyal to Richard II. And at this time in 1400, when he eventually does raise the flag of rebellion, Richard II is they're not sure if he's dead. There are rumors that he's alive in exile. They don't know. So there's some people who thinks Richard's going to return and that he can then use Wales as a staging ground. But this, we don't know much about Owen's life prior to the rebellion because he was such a good English soldier. He was such a good subject of the crown. He was loyal. He never made trouble. He collected his taxes. His people were happy. Everything was good. He was not making any trouble, and he was up in the part of Wales that the English really needed Welsh support. They needed people in the country on their side to control northern Wales. So the first time we ever get any mention of the guy is at a trial between the lords Grosvenor and Scrope, and they had both worn the same coat of arms during the Scottish campaign of Richard II. A 27-year-old Owain Glyndŵr, we have witnessed that he had seen Grosvenor wearing the in question coat of arms, and that in the counties of Chester and Flint, the Azor Abend Or was widely regarded to belong to the aforementioned lord. His brother and brothers-in-law, Tudor Glyndŵr, John Hanmer, and Robert Pulston also gave testimony at this trial. It was in 1389. So then by the time we get to 1400, and again, the age here is a little dubious. We're not sure. He appears to have been born if he had been born in 1359, he would then be about 30 years old when this happened. So that seems to be the case. He was probably around 40 when the time the rebellion started. But the way the rebellion starts is so dumb. But before I get to that, I just want to give one last bit about Owen. There's a bard, Iolo Goch, and he's kind of Owen's personal bard.
Yeah.
Not completely, but he spends a lot of time at Owen's manor. There is a poem, Llys Glyndŵr, where he says that there was, it was infrequent there to see either latch or lock, nor did anyone fulfill the function of porter. That means there was nobody guarding the door. You may come in and out of the manor. There will be no need, beneficial gift, nor want, nor hunger, nor shame, nor thirst ever in Sakarth. Sakarth is, of course, Owen's home.
Yeah.
What this is saying about him is probably exaggerated to an extent, but basically saying that Owen is extremely generous, he's well-liked, he doesn't fear his community because the people love him. As a lord, he is generous and kind, and so there's really, there's no reason, he doesn't bother his neighbors. There's no reason for anybody to be upset about this guy. Until a guy named Reginald de Grey. Reginald de Grey, as you can imagine, is not a Welshman. He is an English lord from Eastern England. He's the lord of Ruthin in Wales, which is very near to Sakarth and Owen's territory. He was even governor of Ireland at one point, and he was not a fan of Owen. Now, he was not a fan of Owen, not because of Owen's behavior as a lord, but because of Owen's behavior as a politician and a soldier. Owen was rather pro-English, but in a we're equal to the English way. Grey did not see it that way. He saw it as the Welsh were lesser than the English and should be the subjects of the English. So it's uncertain exactly what happened. There's a legend that suggests that de Grey actually was the overlord in the area, and that he received a summons that he was supposed to dispatch to the other lords of the region for a campaign in Scotland, and that he never passed it on to Owen, and so Owen then did not show up with his army, and as a result, his lands were confiscated, and that's when he raised the rebellion. The other version, which seems a little bit less fantasy movie, is that de Grey started collecting taxes on Owen's land, and that was basically what ownership was whoever could collect the taxes. That's why you owned land. So he started collecting taxes on Owen's land. Owen apparently went to the courts and said, "Hey, can you do something about this? I'm being robbed." And they essentially told him to go shove it. They just got him stuck, caught up in bureaucratic red tape.
So what you're saying is he quite literally said taxation is theft.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was there. I had to say it. All right,
yeah.
Moving on.
There's two stories here, and basically that Owen had no recourse but to raise the banner of rebellion.
Yeah.
So it's possible that the summons for Glyndŵr by the King Henry IV were entrusted to Reginald, who, out of sheer malice, had withheld it until it was too late to obey, and then taken advantage of the inevitable refusal to represent the Lord of Glyndŵr as a traitor. Glyndŵr, Welsh names. So that's the J.E. Lloyd version from the legend, which is to suggest that Reginald was making a deliberate attempt to cause Owen to commit a crime. In either case, on September 18th, 1400, only a couple of days after inviting his allies to his home at Glyndŵr, which is the location he lived at, he gathers up his troops, a few thousands, and they march to Ruthin, which is de Grey's territory in Wales, and they burn the entire countryside to ash. Like, they just destroy farms and huts and homes and basically everything. They're like, this is war.
Absolutely scorched earth.
It is unlikely that at this time, Owen had any hope of surviving this.
No.
It seems very likely that his goal was to simply cause trouble now. He was, he was not... This seems to have been a kind of a breaking point where if I put myself in his shoes looking back, I have to wonder, did he invite everybody there to say, like, hey, I need you to have my back? And they went, we've been living under the English boot for centuries.
There's no point to rebelling at this point.
We're basically the last of the Welsh at this point. If we're gonna go out, let's go out with a bang. Seems to be what may have happened. So they sack Denbigh, Rhuddlan, Flint, Hawarden, and Holt all by the 24th. That is 6 days. In 6 days, they sack Ruthin, Denbigh, Rhuddlan, Flint, Hawarden, and Holt. You'll keep in mind that is a town a day.
So they're moving quick.
They're moving quick. Now, granted, these towns are only a few miles apart. But
that's
they're
still
moving.
that's still an army you've got to shift. Like,
Yeah,
that's
but
a lot
also
of organisation.
keep in mind what's going on here is they are using hit and run tactics. They are fighting as light infantry. They are not taking castles. Adam of Usk, who's a contemporary chronicler, he's a Welshman, but he's from the south, so he's very Anglophile. He likes the English. He sees the Northerners as, I think he calls them barefoot savages at one point. And he claims that Owen took castles, but modern historians disagree with this. It would have simply taken far too long to do so. A castle was, now keep in mind, these castles were typically staffed with like 30 to 60 men-at-arms. Not a ton, but enough to cause problems for an invading force. Because you still have to get those ladders up the walls. Fact of the matter is, if you got 60 men, it only really takes 2 men to man 1 ladder. And then, of course, there's the militia from the countryside. So it doesn't seem they took any castles. So they defeat the militia at Welshpool on the 23rd. And then on the 24th, I think, it's that they are met by the levies of Shropshire, Staffordshire, and Warwickshire on the banks of the Severn. Owen's force was far smaller, maybe 15, 20,000 men to about 100,000 English militia. They lost. They lost bad. Yeah. They escape up into the mountains. Henry IV mobilized his army and goes on a tour through Wales. He declares Owen an outlaw. He writes that the king is informed that Owain Glyndŵr and other rebels of Wales in no small number have risen in insurrection against his majesty. So, Owen is declared an outlaw. My favorite part of this is is that Adam of Usk it's very funny. He says that after this battle, Owen retreated into the mountains with no more than 7 men. Not that long later, literally the next year, I'll see if I can find the exact quote. The notes I have here are pretty quote heavy. Usk gives this whole thing where he acts like the king did something. There really weren't that many rebels. It was small little groups here and there. They burnt a lot of churches and destroyed property. So Henry he goes around Wales and he isn't resisted. He calls it a victory and grants pardons to any Welsh chieftains who would pursue and capture the others who were still holding out in Snowdonia and elsewhere. So Owen and a few other, they call them chieftains, interestingly enough. But Owen and a few of the other princes and lords are hiding up in the mountains of Snowdon. While they're doing that, William and Rhys ap Tudor, who are from Gwynedd, who are from, I believe, Anglesey, they're in open revolt. They're siding with Owen. And they actually succeed to quite a degree. But all of their property is seized and distributed by the English. There's nothing going on. So he's hiding up in the mountains. By May 3rd, 1401, we're getting reports from Sir Henry Percy that, and he's the son of the Duke of York, that his position is justiciar in of North Wales. He reports on May 3rd, 1401, that the Welsh are in a most submissive mood. Just a month later, Hotspur, Henry Percy, responsible for keeping Owen in check, organizes his forces and marched to Denbigh with the intention of rallying there and marching to the aid of Ruthven, because Ruthven is having some trouble. On June 4th, he consults his advisors regarding how to deal with the Glendower Menace. Now, what is the Glendower Menace? It appears that, let me see if I can find the exact quote from Usk. I'm trying to find it.
That's right. That's the great thing with doing stuff for university, or as you guys call it, college. The amount of quotes you find yourself putting in work.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the exact quote from Usk, but he basically says that Owen just cascades out of the mountain with 30,000 men at his back.
It's like he spawned them in.
He's
been playing Minecraft, spawning villages like the mountains.
Yeah, This is from Thomas Walsingham's account. What do we have? Walsingham's first entry for the year 1402 reads that after a comet passed at the end of March, Owain Glyndŵr laid waste to the lands of Sir Reginald de Grey, and the dice of Mars came down against de Grey, and he was taken prisoner. Because they even fight him at one point. There is a battle. Let's see, where is it?
Do you know what's funny? Do you know what's even more funny about that is the fact that because you've never, have you played Crusader Kings 2 before?
Yeah.
Do you know the comet event? Where
no.
There's an event in Crusader Kings 2. I haven't had it in a while because I've only been playing CK3, where like the comet can either bring really good stuff or like completely destroy your kingdom. And it's like the fact that he came down after a comet showed up. Someone was playing Crusader Kings.
June 21st, 1401 is possibly one of my favorite dates in history because it's the Battle of Bryn, Glas.
Go on.
Owen, with a force of about 25,000 men, is sitting up on a hill. Actually, let me make sure my numbers are right here because it's been a few years since I
don't want to go full ancient historian.
Looked at this. Oh, okay. Sorry, wrong year. It was the 1402. So this can't be the same. This can't be the right battle. It maybe it is. But I think I'm looking at the right battle.
Let us know. I believe it's below.
Yeah. I believe it's Bryn Glas. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is the right one.
Yeah.
There's multiple accounts. The early ones say that Owen has like 15,000 men, and the British have 25 to 50,000. It's believed that those may have been exaggerated numbers. Wikipedia says 1,500 and 2,000. I don't think that's right either. That's too small. Edmund Mortimer was bringing an entire army of Hereford. It probably was not that small. So Owen did something smart. He put his men up on the top of the hill. His archers at the very top, his infantry right in front, and then he took a smaller portion of the force, infantry and cavalry, and concealed them in a valley behind the hill. Before the battle is when he actually won it. Because Mortimer shows up with heavily armored infantry, an entire detachment of his own longbowmen. But prior to the battle, Owen had sent his own men, his own agents, to go and recruit and sign up for the army of Hereford, for Edmund Mortimer's army, as longbowmen. And when they got there, it was their job at night, when everybody was sitting around their campfires and just chatting, to foment dissent amongst the Welsh ranks within the English army.
Clever.
And what they did was convince the Welsh archers to, at a certain point during the battle, as Edmund Mortimer's infantry were advancing up the hill, once they were far enough up that turning around wasn't really an option, the Welsh, let me put it this way, the Welsh longbow is on top of the hill. They're on top of the hill. They have better range. The longbows at the bottom of the hill just can't reach. They just can't get there. They just keep missing. And then at one point during the battle, somebody gives a sign, and a good 2/3 to 3/4 of the longbowmen on the English side start shooting directly into the backs of the English infantry.
That's quite smart.
Crushed them. And now you might think, oh, well, the English cavalry probably made short work of the archers. That's at the moment when they start shooting the English is when Owen's cavalry and infantry run out from behind the hill.
It's perfectly timed to distract.
It's cinematic. It is really incredible. And this is a guy, Owen, after this battle, he's doomed. He's destined to lose. There's no way. They don't have the numbers, the money, any of it. But he does manage to set up a parliament. He does manage to get representatives of, I think it's France and Spain and Portugal, I think, to come to his parliament. He has ambassadors. He's communicating. He's preparing to set up his own church in Wales. He's creating a country while fighting this war. And he ends up in a position where at one point, I can't remember the exact name of the battlefield, he has an army of Frenchmen at his back. He's got his army, he's got the French, and they're facing off against the English on a field. For whatever reason, they chose not to chose not to engage. The French ended up going home. Let me see if
That's what happens when you ask the French for help.
yeah, right.
It's fine. It's a running joke to everyone that's now offended. It's a running joke between both of our channels that we mock the French.
Let's see.
I think I get more heat for that.
Here we go.
Yeah. No, I think I do notice Battle of Shrewsbury. The name sounds familiar, but I have a funny feeling I know what's going to happen in this one.
If I'm remembering this correctly, the Battle of Shrewsbury was we're unsure who started it, but the English rebels under Hotspur, who we'll remember was previously in charge of keeping Owen in check, sides with Owen. Oh, by the way, the guy who was in command at the Battle of Bryn, Glas, in command of the English forces, Edmund Mortimer,
yeah,
he's captured. He's sitting in prison, wasting away.
Oh.
Until Owen offers Edmund the opportunity to marry his daughter, bringing Edmund into the fray and securing Hereford and most of southern England. Hotspur and his father, the Duke of York, also side with Owen in what they call the tripartite indenture. Now their plan...
Things are really going his way at this point.
Oh, yeah. In 1403, absolutely. The plan was that they would defeat Henry IV, and then they would break up England. The north would go to York, the south would go to Mortimer, and Wales, as well as a good stretch of central England, Mercia, would go to Owen as King of Wales, or Prince of Wales, probably. At Shrewsbury, the plan was that Hotspur's forces from northern England would go and lay siege and wait for reinforcements from Wales, as well as southern England from Mortimer. We don't know specifically what happened. All we know is that the battle began with an exchange of arrow volleys, and the Welsh had the better arrows and the better archers. They were getting the better of that. And a number of English soldiers, actually, supposedly according to Thomas Walsingham, thought that the king had been killed in this barrage and, fled. And then, because, wait, what am I? Fled. Yeah. Basically you're looking at a situation where the battle is going kind of both ways. The Welsh definitely have the better of it at range, but the English, if they're able to close, are going to win. Let me actually, I'll just read this to you. Yeah. Okay. Where are we here?
And then what we'll probably do is we'll move on to Atlantis.
We'll probably switch after. Yeah,
because I've just looked at the time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I love this subject.
No, it's fine. This is your Alexander. This is
so July of 1403 was filled with chaos for the English on the marches. Castles at Harlech and Aberystwyth were under siege. Letters pleading for aid flowed from numerous holdings, and now the heir to the Earl of Northumberland, not Duke of York, had raised 14,000 men in rebellion against the king. It's a lot of men, with the promise that King Richard II was still alive and would be present with Hotspur's forces. Hotspur's uncle joined them, and his father, the Earl of Northumberland, was capable of marching south to join his son with much of the might of all of northern England. With the might of the Welshmen of the march behind him, and reinforcements only a week away, Hotspur was forced to make a decision. Should he wait for his father and send notice to Owen, potentially giving King Henry time to reinforce his own son at Shrewsbury? Yes, the commander at Shrewsbury was Henry V. Should he wait and potentially risk English reinforcements arriving to help out Henry V? He's not yet Henry V. No. He's still just the prince. Or should he attack immediately while the prince is the only one in the city and has a small army? Hotspur chose to attack, and he sets off for Shrewsbury. By the 13th, however, the king is at Nottingham and had been told of the defection, at which point he changed course. He was headed for Scotland. And made for the site of the expected battle. It was a race for the fate of Hotspur's rebellion, and it was a race that he, unfortunately for the Welsh, would lose. King Henry arrived on July 20th, just in time to get his men inside of the city and lock the gates. As a result of his late arrival, Hotspur was forced to withdraw to a field 3 miles outside of Shrewsbury, where he had little choice but to wait for King Henry to make the next move. Owen, from the last records we have of his location, was at Carmarthen on the 12th, but there is no way of knowing for certain whether he'd attempt to render immediate or direct aid to Hotspur. He was supposed to, but this was Hotspur's rebellion right now. This was Northumberland leading this fight. Owen was also involved in a rebellion, but they didn't see themselves as one rebellion necessarily. It was an alliance of 3 rebellions.
Yeah.
So Owen is on the way to help, we believe. While Davies and Lloyd don't describe any details of the battle, Walsingham writes that King Henry offered pardon to the Percys, the Earls of Northumberland, and all their men should they stand down and return home. In his version of events, King Henry agreed to terms which were beneficial to Hotspur, and it was the treachery of Hotspur's envoy, his uncle Thomas Percy, which caused the battle. The battle reportedly began with exchange of arrow volleys, of which the Welsh had and their longbows both shot first and had the better, and the flight of many thousands of men, as they thought the king had been killed by arrows. Then, in a display of desperate gallantry, Hotspur himself led his knights in a charge against nobody but the person of the king. Basically, Hotspur was looking at this going, all right, well, we have the advantage at range, but the moment the English close, we're screwed. So how can we win this battle?
Take off the head of the army.
Kill the King of England.
Yeah.
So they charge him, and they kill a lot of English soldiers, but Hotspur dies, as do about 200 knights and squires, and Thomas Percy is captured and executed. The account from Adam of Usk differs a little bit. It says that the king advanced first. Basically, that the king made the first move. It's trying to make the English king look decisive. And he records that this led to the loss of 16,000 lives, but in the end, it was the king who, having begun the assault, emerged as victor. I want to point out that 16,000 deaths, 16,000 casualties, okay. 16,000 deaths is a lot of deaths for a medieval battle. Especially a battle of such small scale. We're not talking about crusades here. We're not talking about, the English fighting the French. This is the English fighting the English in a small rebellion in England. Now granted, Adam of Usk probably gets this wrong. He's probably way overdoing it on the number of men. He wasn't present at the battle. But yeah, Adam was actually in Rome at the time he wrote this. He was just reporting on what he'd heard. Walsingham
so
is
the story's probably
the more accurate
account.
We don't totally know why Owen wasn't there. All we know is that he was on the other side of Wales 10 days before the battle. He may have been unwilling to expose the Welsh soldiers, who were typically lightly armored skirmish troops, who relied on speed and agility, to a battle against English heavy infantry.
Do you think Owen could have turned the tables with his numbers?
It would not be his numbers. It would have been his tactical acumen.
Okay.
Owen was a brilliant tactician. Not a great strategist, but a brilliant tactician.
It's a bit like Pyrrhus of Epirus then. He's like a little bit like Pyrrhus.
It's kind of the same thing. So after 1403, the tripartite indenture doesn't look like it's very viable anymore. Had it succeeded, then King Henry probably would have died. The Lancasters would have been done for, because Henry V was there too. And Edmund Mortimer probably would have been the one on the throne. Instead, that didn't happen, but this battle doesn't totally affect the Welsh. All it does is basically take away Owen's assistance from Northern England. He goes on to establish the first Welsh Parliament. He goes into hiding in 1411, and actually outlives King Henry. He supposedly died in September of 1415. That's an English story. English soldiers claim they found his body. As far as the Welsh are concerned, Owen went into hiding, joining the likes of Arthur to bide his time, ready to return when his people would finally throw off the yoke of English rule once again. So,
so the story is that he's hiding somewhere with King Arthur.
Yeah, basically. He's chilling in the other world.
which actually brings us neatly on to neatly onto Atlantis because there is one legend that Camelot did
What I'm
sink.
doing.
Yeah, that was smooth. Because there is. I remember when I was young, I went to Land's End, and there was a big info, and that we got like this was when I was in the height of my King Arthur obsession, because I've had several obsessions, and I remembered like the Camelot sinking, and it was like the reason Land's End is here is because it was a path to Camelot, and that's I can see that version of the story is, to my knowledge, actually comes from one of the English kings. It was an early on. It might have been like Edward II, who was obsessed. And that's why you have Tintagel Castle, because it became an English obsession to become King Arthur when all of the myths of King Arthur.
Which is ironic. Yeah, all of the myths of King Arthur are about him defeating the English. Like his entire purpose was driving out the English before they were even the English. Like.
Yep.
And then most of the legends we have about King Arthur come from later English traditions in the 12th century, and then the French got a hold of it. He goes from being in Nennius's account in the 9th century, I want to say. This Welsh monk Nennius gives a Historia Britannicum. It's looked at often as a pseudo-history as far as some of the earliest details go, but when it comes to more recent events, he's a little bit more reliable. He's at least in the ballpark. It's no longer complete fantasy. It is events that happen, but we just can't tell exactly how accurate he's being. His version is that Arthur's not even King of Wales. There is no Wales. In fact, he's not even necessarily a king of anything. It said that he was 12 times elected, though there were many more noble than he. Now, in this case, the term noble probably does not refer necessarily to morality, but rather to blood. Arthur is not of kingly stock. He might be aristocratic, but he's not the king of Britain. He's not Vortigern. And so 12 times he's elected general, not high king. He's elected general of the armies. 12 times he defeats the Saxons. With the ultimate battle at Baden Hill, where he supposedly kills, like 600 men by his own hand, which is probably not true. But that's the original Arthur. And then by like 1450, you've got stories where Arthur conquered literally the entire world, including China.
Yeah.
So 1,000 years after he actually lived,
I feel
he conquered China.
At some point, like with a lot of mythological figures, you find that Alexander seeps in. Alexander always he finds his way in. And actually, I remember reading, like, it was years ago. I can't remember the source, and I highly doubt it's got any validity. But there was actually this storyline that Arthur was based off of Alexander. And like it's just how the myth travelled through, and then the early tribes were like
parts of the story absolutely could be.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think now there is definitely elements of Alexander in the King Arthur mythos, which you have to admit that is amazing that one aspect of Welsh mythology is its own mythology. Like Arthurian mythology, because that was what I there was a joke I cut from my Morrigan video where I was explaining the difference, because there was people who were connecting the Morrigan with Morgan Le Fay, and this was my heart's. Do you remember in our first time we did it? Actually, no, I think it was on your podcast where we was debating if Arthur was originally a Saxon myth or a Welsh myth, who had him first.
Yeah,
and as I was researching Morrigan, it was like the reason the Morrigan isn't connected to Morgan Le Fay is because the word "more" means something different in Irish and Welsh. And I sat there reading that one sentence in Aidan, and I was like, "Fuck, Aidan's right." And I was like, "I'm gonna have to." And then there's a joke I cut, and I was like, "People have to understand the backstory to get the joke." And I was like, "Not enough people are gonna know that backstory." But it was just really funny. Of like,
it's an incredible story. It's fascinating, and the thing around his name even too, because like Pendraig, if Pendragon, of course, Pendraig are both Welsh words, and they would mean high dragon. Arthur. Now the Welsh do have they did borrow the term Ardri, from the Irish at one point, and I've gotten a lot of people who argue with me about this, but they did in fact borrow the term ardri, which of course means high king. There's also Arth in Welsh means bear. And I think Ri still means king. But there's one version of it where they think it means like, great bear, high dragon. I think it's great king, high dragon, or high king, great dragon. I can't remember the exact way the words translate, but because what you get there is Arthri Pendrech. Arthur Pendragon. My professor, one of my favorite professors in the world, I took like 6 classes with him. He wrote my recommendation letters for grad school. His name is Benjamin Hudson. Fantastic guy. Love him. One of the best medievalists I've ever spoken to. He thinks I'm wrong.
Oh.
He thinks I'm totally off base. It was very funny because I asked him about it when I was a sophomore in college, and he was like, no, definitely not. I'm like, okay. But I went on, looked into it. I still think it comes from that. His version was that Arthur was probably a member of the Roman civil service. Keep in mind, the story of Arthur starts around 450, 500. So this is only a generation or two after the Romans left.
Yeah. Because you still had Romans. A lot of people forget a lot of the Celtic kingdoms that form, which we have shockingly little information on, which annoys me, because we know about the Anglo-Saxon heptarchy. We don't know about the Celtic kingdoms that formed. And because a load of those in the southern part of England were Roman-based. Like people, because everyone's like, civilization collapsed and everyone went back to hill forts. They didn't. A lot of the southern cities actually remained fairly Roman, because there was Celto-Roman was a culture.
Yep. That is the fascinating part. That's why earlier when I mentioned Cymru and the Picts, the difference between the Welsh and the Picts in 450 AD was Rome.
Yeah,
because the people below Hadrian's Wall, in the cities at least, were Romanized. They had Roman civil government, they had Roman cities, Roman architecture, Roman religion, as in Christianity. And when the Romans left and things became a little bit more difficult, it was actually the Picts who, according to the legend, are the catalyst for the Saxons coming to Britain in the first place.
Yes, because they
said that Vortigern invited them over as mercenaries, and then they were like, this land's kind of cool, we don't want to leave. But yeah, so the difference was that the Picts up north were probably very similar to how the Welsh were 500 years prior. And the accounts we get of the Britons from Caesar and from the Romans really do match the later accounts of the Picts. What we learn about the Iceni matches the people north of Hadrian's Wall. So fascinating comparisons and everything. But the people in the cities were still functioning as Romans, and outside of the cities, they were starting to go back to the hill forts.
Yeah.
Gildas's Ruin of Britain, I highly recommend reading. Anybody who hasn't read that but is interested in the history of Britain, Gildas, the Ruin of Britain, it's a little dry, but it's prophetic, because what he says is if the Christian Welsh kings cannot, he used the term Britons, if the Christian Britons cannot unite as they did under Rome, then they will be destroyed both from within and without. Which is precisely what happens to them.
Yep.
And he wrote that in like 517. Let me look up the exact date of that.
I will add that there is a hypothesis that the Huns were also partially due to the Saxon migrations. Specifically,
the Huns definitely affected it. So Gildas was he lived about 500 to 570, and the Welsh poet Aneurin is actually traditionally associated with Gildas as a brother. And Aneurin is the first mention we get of Arthur. So Gildas would have been a contemporary of Arthur, as would Aneurin. And Aneurin writes in Ygodothin, which is the story of this battle between the Angles, actually, and the Celts of Gododin and Regith and Altclut and all of these northern Welsh kingdoms. What he writes is there's one really quick little mention to Arthur. And all it says is this passage about, I'll see if I can find it really quick to read it to you.
I think you said it before. He was as noble as Arthur, as built as Arthur, wise as Arthur. I vaguely remember you saying it.
Yeah, let me see if I can snag the exact quote for you. Let's see. The Arth Connection. This is about I believe it was Gur-Arthur. Yeah. In stanza 99, the poet praises one of the warriors, Gur-Arthur. Gur-Arthur. God, this is so hard to pronounce. He fed black ravens on the rampart of a fortress, though he was no Arthur. Among the powerful ones in battle, in the front rank, Gur-Arthur was a palisade. There is an earlier translation. He fed black ravens on the wall of the fortress, although he was not Arthur. Among those powerful in feats in the front rank, a palisade, Gur-Arthur. So what does that mean? He fed. Oh, by the way, he fed ravens. Typically, what that means is not that he's just throwing them bread. Ravens are scavengers. What he fed It's so badass. What it actually means. He fed ravens means he killed them left and right on the ramparts of that city. And what it's saying is he fed the ravens. That means he himself is just murking people left and right. But he's still no Arthur.
So they're basically...
What does that say? What does that say about Arthur? A guy who supposedly died between 500 and 550, within a century before this.
I have an interesting, because obviously, as I went into on my Morgan video, Celtic mythology is very much divided because of the various different historical factors. What if...
And Irish and Brythonic are very different.
It's literally Gaelic and Brythonic.
Yeah, so, they're two different languages too, like different language groups, P Celtic and Q Celtic.
But my question is if those mythologies diverged at any point, is there a chance that Q Calain and Arthur are... No?
Nope.
Okay. Am I getting...
It's very largely a dates thing.
Okay.
We have, I think the earliest extant mention of him is from the 12th century. So if anything, it would be that Cuchulainn was based on Arthur, not Arthur being based on Cuchulainn.
That's what I mean, yeah. Is there any way
that you're doing here? So maybe, but Cuchulainn, there's little tiny elements of the stories that match a little bit, but it's more likely that that's due to the Celtic hero cycle. You know, this style of storytelling and these narrative archetypes. I have never met a scholar who thinks that those two are descended from one another. And if they were, it would have been during the Middle Ages after the life of Arthur. Yeah. So I do think the story of Cuchulainn takes place earlier too. I believe Cuchulainn takes place in the...
It's in the Ulster cycle.
Century AD?
It's in the Ulster cycle. I did very recently learn like the stages of Irish mythology, because it's set into stages, but there's also previous versions of how it's categorized. But I know it's in the Ulster cycle. The bits I learned were to do with Morrigan. I specifically was learning about the cattle raid of Cooley.
Yeah, so he was the greatest of the Knights of the Red Branch, i.e. the warriors loyal to Conor MacNessa, who was reputedly king of the Ulades of Northeast Ireland at about the beginning of the 1st century BCE. So Cuchulainn's story would take place around the same time that Sulla was conquering Spain. Yeah.
So before Arthur, long before Arthur.
Long before Arthur, but the extant mentions are from the 12th century. Now listen, is when we get this story of he's part of the Knights of the Red Branch. Well, that sounds like Knights of the Round Table. That all comes from the Comitatus, the Posse Comitatus, which was a early medieval system of combat where you'd have warriors, household warriors, who would gather around a legendary warrior. You can think Cuchulainn, Knights of the Red Branch, Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, Beowulf, and I don't think his followers have a specific name. They might, but so that's Irish, Welsh, and German.
Oh,
well, it's Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, I was going to say Beowulf is actually contested to either be a Norse myth or an Anglo-Saxon tale. It's very convoluted.
I should have said Germanic. Germanic's the broader group. So that's we've got Gaelic, Brythonic, and Germanic. That suggests, and these stories are all from around the same time. in terms of when they were written down.
Mm.
That suggests that these are more narrative archetypes than
Yes.
any direct connection between them. Now, I will say this, if there ever comes a time where somebody uncovers a manuscript and they can prove that it is legit, and it says something along the lines of that, you know, there was a story where Arthur went to Ireland and became part of the Knights of the Red Branch or something like that, at that point I'd be like, okay, that, you know what, that might be connected.
Yeah,
but given the current evidence, there's very little possibility that the two are directly connected. But speaking of things that have very little evidence,
there we go. Hey, I was literally about to use the Morrigan and the fact she's connected to water to go back to Atlantis. That's just a smooth. But given how limited time we have left, debate me. Well, not debate me. Get me to believe in Atlantis, because you nearly had me last time. You brought me into for a very, very, very quick recap of everyone. I was trying to debunk Atlantis, and I was saying how there's all these myths of flooding and sinking cities around the world, so it's probably just a contingent myth. And then Aidan sat there smiling as I slowly realised I was actually making an argument for Atlantis instead by my own accidental admission. But yes, go on.
So, I think we gotta start right here with defining what we mean by Atlantis, you know? Because a lot of people, if you look at Jimmy Corsetti, Bright Insight, he says it's the Eye of the Sahara. Why is it the Eye of the Sahara? Because it's concentric circles. And Plato says that Atlantis was a city made of concentric circles and that it had canals in between, and you know, and Jimmy does something weird where he says in his videos that the dimensions given by Plato match the dimensions of the Rashat structure, and they don't at all. It's not even a little bit close. I don't know how he came to that conclusion, but I wish he would have checked with somebody else first. It seems to me like clickbait, and he ended up on Joe Rogan. So there's that. I don't think it's that.
This is why you need to go on Joe Rogan
Atlantis
and fix it.
of the Disney movie. I think it's Disney, right? Yeah, it's Disney.
Yes.
The Disney Atlantis movie.
Might be DreamWorks.
In which they're these, you know, back before it is Disney. I just watched it on Disney Plus. Okay. So it's I thought it was DreamWorks too beforehand. It feels like DreamWorks when you watch it. It's got the same animation style as like Prince of Egypt and stuff. So their version of Atlantis is that there's flying tanks and lasers and stuff, and you know, not talking about that either. There's the Assassin's Creed version.
Oh, that's
where you've got like
awful DLC.
I'm talking about Assassin's Creed 2, actually.
Oh, you're not talking about Odyssey's version of Atlantis?
No, I'm talking about Assassin's Creed 2.
Okay.
Their version of it is that Adam and Eve were like escaped slave class people, like humans originated as slave species of a higher being. Yeah, and you have to do a ridiculous amount of work in that game outside of the main quest to actually piece it together.
Yes.
But it's worth it. You know, it's a fun. They're fun little things.
I didn't bother. I just watched it on YouTube. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't do the extra work.
I actually went through the process. But yeah, so when I say Atlantis, what I am talking about is not necessarily even one culture, but rather the idea that prior to Meltwater Pulse 1b, which was the sea level rise event 11,600 years ago at the end of the Younger Dryas period, which we believe was caused by, I want to say, a comet or a meteor. We don't know particularly, but that is the belief, because what began the Younger Dryas was a comet. So the Younger Dryas period is a glacial maximum. It is the end of the Ice Age. It is when the glaciers are at one of their broadest extents. And it is believed that what happened is that a meteor crashed into the ocean, put a bunch of water vapor into the air, changed that threw ice into the water, cooled everything. And then 1,200 years later, that another comet hit Earth, or a meteor hit Earth, and it caused global warming. So there was global cooling, and then there was global warming, and then it got warmer again, and then colder again, and then warmer again a bunch of times. The Earth goes through geothermic cycles that make it a couple degrees warmer on average and a couple degrees lower on average every like 800 years or so.
I do remember there's that we during the I think it's the Bronze Age, we should have been hit with another ice age, which should have stopped.
Yeah.
Like Rome, Carthage, all of that should have
Mhm.
never been able to exist. It should have been pushed
Yep.
further south. So yeah,
If you look at a lot of this stuff, there really are like 800-year cycles here. There's a medieval climactic maximum. There's a Roman climactic maximum. That just every like 600 to 1,000 years you get warming and cooling periods.
yeah,
And they're pretty drastic sometimes. At one point in the Middle Ages, you could grow wine grapes in Sweden.
wow.
Wine grapes, like the kind of grapes you could currently grow in France, like in southern France. You could have had the Napa Valley in California in Sweden. So it was a lot warmer. It was way, way warmer. Yeah, and then there was cooling that happened in the 1300s, and that's when you get plagues and population loss, and people have to migrate. There was a similar cooling period during the migration period, so it was getting colder as all of these tribes were moving around Europe. That's part of the reason that a lot of the tribes moved, is because they could no longer farm effectively, and they needed to search for new land. So what am I looking at when I say Atlantis? Well, I'm saying something that existed prior to all of that sea level rise. What does that mean? Probably Bronze Age. If you think about at what point would artifacts survive to this day? At what point would we find them? Iron Age. Maybe. We might be able to find 10,000-year-old steel.
So you're not
It would have to be perfectly preserved.
So you're not arguing for like a perfectly like hyper advanced civilization like some of them. Okay. So you're
I'm saying Bronze Age Egypt or Mycenaean Greece. Maybe the Minoans.
I think they may have been
What?
slightly more advanced than civilizations at the time, which is where the myth has sort of evolved.
Exactly.
Okay.
So when you compare those people to Neolithic hunter-gatherers, very advanced.
Yes.
When you look at the description of them, Plato does not describe them as having flying machines. What does he describe them as? He says that they have a city of concentric circles. And in this city of concentric circles, there are canals. And then eventually, because of hubris, the gods sink Atlantis. The most interesting part of Plato's story is actually not anything about his description of Atlantis, because none of it matters. He doesn't tell us anything specific about their technology. Are they Bronze Age? Are they Iron Age? We don't know. What he tells us is that it happened 11,600 years ago. He tells us it was that the story was passed on by Egyptian priests to his ancestor, Solon of Athens, and that all of this occurred 9,000 years before the time of Solon. Solon of Athens lived around the year 600 BC. What does that mean? 11,600 years ago is when Atlantis sank. So we have meltwater pulse 1b, during which it's disputed how much, but anywhere from 100 feet to 500 feet of sea level rise over the course of a few years to 100 years. So we don't know particularly, but what's pretty certain is that there was a pretty significant level of sea level rise, like inches per year, at least. Like probably a couple of inches of sea level rise per month at certain points. What that means is that any civilization, which of course we know civilizations develop along coastlines and rivers first, any sort of civilization that existed 11,600 years ago would have been on the coastlines, and 100 feet of sea level rise would bury the entire island of Manhattan underwater. It would turn Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is in Pennsylvania, it's in Pennsylvania. That's like Pennsylvania Dutch. That's the Amish. They'd have beachfront property. That might be exaggerating a little bit, but you get my point. Like, it would drive the coastlines back miles.
I am now imagining the
surface,
Amish on like a beach holiday, just a little scuba hat.
So imagine you are an Atlantean. You exist in a Bronze Age-ish society. And one day, the water just starts rising really fast. what do you have time to do? Probably gather a few basic possessions, things you can carry, and get to higher ground. Now, the water never recedes, so everything you own is lost and you have to start over. It's probably going to be some conflict, some people fighting over resources. You're going to have to start over completely in a new place. And, you and I have technology. We're speaking to each other via a system of microphones, cameras, and the internet. Ryan, if the entire world collapsed tomorrow and you and I had to relocate into the highlands of Scotland and the mountains of central Pennsylvania, you and I would never speak again, because neither of us have any idea how to do any of this. So, you gotta remember, that's technology, that's how it works, is just because you have something, if there's a cataclysm, the people who know how it works didn't necessarily survive. So what happens when all of your engineers, all of your architects, your mathematicians, either are killed or they have to divert their resources and their energy to simply hunting to survive? You lose things. Over a few generations, you completely lose everything you ever knew.
Everything falls back, yeah.
Falls back in good ways. So, if you're at a position where it's the Bronze Age, well, the Bronze Age collapse probably set us back 500 years. Imagine if everything collapsed. Because with the Bronze Age collapse, that was an economic collapse. The buildings were still there. The written works were still there.
And you
The
still
stories were
had
still there. The monuments were still there.
civilizations are outside.
You still
of,
had
like,
other
that little pocket.
civilizations. Exactly. What we're talking about with Atlantis is a massive cataclysmic level of sea level rise, which would have caused everything to change. You wouldn't be able to run away for a little bit, hide in the mountains, and then come back and have your home and your texts and all that still there. You would have had to leave everything behind except that which you could carry, which would set civilization back millennia.
Yeah.
Not just a few hundred years. You would be looking at restarting. You might remember how to do agriculture, but you probably didn't remember how to construct an aqueduct. And where would all of the evidence of this civilization be? It would be 100 feet underwater and almost 12,000 years old. There's no way that the likelihood you'd come across it is so insanely low, you'd have to search the ocean floor for miles. We don't actually have a good idea where Atlantis even was. All we know is that Plato says it was about the size of Africa. Keep in mind, Africa, at that time to them, meant Libya. Maybe at the very most, stretched from Egypt over to Morocco. But it was not the entire continent of Africa. They didn't know how deep that thing went. It's one of the biggest continents on Earth, if not the biggest.
I have. So what if it was just we know that the Nile River has flooded many times. If you gave that enough of a push, what if that was just a precursor to Egypt? Because the Egyptians had archaeologists. The Egyptians had archaeologists looking at other things the Egyptians did.
Yeah.
Because people forget, because we was digging up and was like, wait, this is like an archaeological. Oh wait, these were ancient Egyptian. This is before the Greeks as well. So this was to the Romans, ancient Egyptians looking at even more ancient Egyptians. So
the issue with that is Plato's location.
Okay.
He says Atlantis is west of the Pillars of Heracles, which would have been in the Atlantic. However, there's issues with that. It seems like Plato probably only had a small portion of the story. In Turkey, back in the 90s, I think. It may have been discovered in the 70s, and they began excavating in the 90s, I want to say. Gobekli Tepe.
I knew you was going to bring up Gobekli Tepe.
It's an 11,600-year-old, we believe it might have been a temple site. Perfectly north-south aligned. The alignment actually changes with time as it goes on. It seems they were using astronomy to track where the stars were. Some people have disputed this and said, where it's not actually perfectly north-south aligned. I think archaeologists are full of shit and desperately trying to protect the paradigm. I
so want to organise a debate between you and some archaeologists, I know.
So this is a constant struggle between historians and archaeologists. As historians going, these finds seem to imply something. And the archaeologists going, we have no evidence of that. And the historians going, well, we know that we haven't found the artifacts yet. But they're probably there if you look. And the archaeologists going, no.
I'm actually, to back that, to everyone who's like, that's a silly argument. That's the exact argument that was used against Charles Darwin.
It's also the exact argument used to suggest that Troy didn't exist.
Yep. And both
And
of
then
them.
and then one German guy was like, I don't care how much you think I'm wrong, I'm gonna spend some money. And he found Troy.
He did
and
also use a lot of
destroyed
TNT.
6 cities in the process.
Like, he did.
But he did find Troy.
I still argue that he was a net negative though, because he destroyed so much.
Absolutely, he was definitely a net negative. If he had simply gotten there and been like, I think it's here,
just chiseled patiently.
2 centuries later, we would have been on it. But that man was convinced he was gonna find Troy. And in some ways, yeah, it was a net negative. In other ways, you know what? It's a pretty good piece of ammunition to have when an archaeologist tells you we don't have evidence of something. Okay, well, maybe you just haven't found it yet. So, and this is no disrespect to archaeologists. Their work is essential for my work. As a historian, like, I can't do half my job if they don't exist.
Yeah, without archaeologists, there's no historians.
Yeah, we would struggle in the modern day. We would be much more like journalists, which is kind of what like Herodotus was.
Ironically, if there was no archaeologists, no historians, then you'd have no folklorists or like demonologists or anything, because it'd all be forgotten. Snowball effect.
And so, but they find Gobekli Tepe. It's 11,600 years old. It's got images of animals that aren't native to that region, and it was built. It's a megalithic site, monumental. It's built before we figured out agriculture. So, either it was aliens, or we're missing a chapter of our story. I err on the side of we're missing a chapter of our story.
No, it's not aliens. I'm not.
No. So the way I'm looking at it is, all right, well, we got Plato gets the date perfectly right for the sinking of Atlantis. So, tradition, sinking of Atlantis, 11,600 years ago. Meltwater Pulse 1b, 11,600 years ago. Construction of Gobekli Tepe, 11,600 years ago. That is 3 pieces of evidence that point to the idea that there was something more going on 11,600 years ago than just hunter-gatherers.
Big civilization that collapsed.
There must have been something there. And maybe it wasn't one civilization. Maybe it was just that humanity was in the Bronze Age. And we fell out of it because of a cataclysm. Because again, if we're just sitting on the coasts...
Oh yeah, I mean...
Where's the first place you would go build an altar or a temple after a flood?
You would build it high up.
High up. in the mountains of Turkey.
Maybe one day we're going to uncover like a button, like an Isu level button, and it just powers up.
You know what else is... You know what's just northeast of Gobekli Tepe? The mountains of Ararat. Where have you heard that word before?
Isn't it biblical?
Genesis. It is where Noah's Ark landed. Now it says Mount Ararat. I do wonder if it was supposed to be the mountains of Ararat, or if the mountains of Ararat were perhaps named after Mount Ararat from the Bible. But it's the mountains of Ararat are where he's supposed to have landed. And if you look at it and say the Bible is probably at the very least broadly accurate. It's granularly accurate in a number of cases, but it's broadly accurate in most cases. The mountains of Ararat are just north of Mesopotamia, which is the birthplace of civilization. So, what's the story we get in the Bible? Well, the Ark lands in the mountains of Ararat, and then Noah's family comes down. The very first thing they do is build an altar. And then we get kind of a giant skip in time here, and then we have Abraham. And Abraham's down in Ur of the Chaldees, which is southern Mesopotamia. He goes up to Haran, which is in Syria, and then heads over west into Canaan. At this point in history, there's a lot of people. There was definitely a jump between Noah and Abraham. There's 10 generations listed in the Bible. It's possible that it's more. The numerology of the Bible is super complex and difficult. I'm trying to figure out how to reconcile the timing with known history. But the point of the matter is, I'm not saying that the Bible is... I'm Christian, but I'm not saying that the Bible is completely accurate about all things. What I'm saying is that that's a narrative that matches with Gobekli Tepe. Because it's a flood, and at the time of the flood, there's civilization. There are buildings, there are structures, there are cities, and all of it is wiped out by the flood. And then after that, the very first thing anybody does is build a an altar south of the mountains of Ararat. And then civilization just dawns. So that is now a much later folkloric account, you could call it, of the same story as Atlantis. If you look at basically any civilization, they all have flood myths, but especially the ones in that region. So what seems likely to me, based on all of those factors, is that around 12,000 years ago, there was a, let's say, Bronze Age level civilization that spanned, and let's not even say civilization. Let's say that humanity in the region of the Mediterranean had entered the Bronze Age. We'll say that. Meltwater Pulse 1b hits. It sinks everything on the coastlines. Everybody retreats further up into the mountains, into the hills, into the highlands, and they start over. The people who were there for the flood would be probably the last people who would remember anything about architecture, agriculture, any of it. And they probably did try their best to impart that knowledge. But how likely is it that a small amount of survivors successfully recreated an entire civilization? It's unlikely. But it makes sense that those people would be able to construct something like Gobekli Tepe. That they'd be able to do at least small-scale agriculture to sustain themselves for a little while. And maybe what you had was something like what we see with the decay of the Roman Empire.
Because a lot of...
You have all of these...
Well, it's like the Danes and the Norse when they came over. In fact, there was some Saxon scholars who argued that the buildings built by the Romans were actually built by giants. I know that's been widely debunked, but there were, like, especially the Danes and the Norse, who believed it was built by giants because there was no way a human could have built these structures. I mean, if you look at an aqueduct with no knowledge, like if today, like a 4-year-old goes and sees a fully fleshed out built Roman aqueduct, the only way you're going to logically put that together is something big built that.
Exactly. So I don't think it was giants. I don't think it was aliens or anything like that.
Wendigoon's crying right
part
now.
of me, as a Christian, I gotta sit here and be like, probably the Nephilim had something to do with it. But here's another possibility. Maybe that altar, maybe Gobekli Tepe, and they're finding more of those, by the way.
What if it's a library?
This is my favorite thing. Somebody was arguing with me. Was arguing with me about Gobekli Tepe and saying, "Oh, well, Gobekli Tepe's not that big a deal. It's not unique. It's not special. We're finding more of them in a ring around it, miles away. More Tepe sites,
concentric
in
rings?
A circle, around one circle." You might even say concentric rings. We haven't found all of them yet. I'm not going to make any assumptions about what's there. But this person tells me, oh yeah, we're finding more of them. They're not unique. They're not special. And I'm like, are they also built 11,600 years ago? And they went, yeah, of course. Like I said, there's nothing special about Gobekli Tepe. There's more of them. And I'm here like, I don't know. It sounds to me like there was a civilization capable of building multiple megalithic sites in a circle around each other 11,600 years ago. That doesn't match anything. In fact, that gives more credence to the argument that there was something more going on. Because it's already unlikely that a pre-agricultural group of people could build something like Gobekli Tepe if you take a look at it. It's even more unlikely that a pre-agricultural group of people could build multiple Gobekli Tepes and have them in a geological ring miles apart.
Is there any chance it could be a library of some sort that we've just lost?
I don't know. I don't want to speculate. There doesn't seem to be any writing there. At least nothing we can decipher. There's symbols, but most of them are animals. We can't tell if it's hieroglyphics.
What I can say to that is if I built a library room now, and all it was links to YouTube videos that you and I have created as a map of all of the stuff we've created, then our civilization goes extinct 2,000 years later, someone's digging it up, and they go, oh, this is just a room full of these screens that don't do it. They wouldn't even see it as screens because it'd all be dust.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's possible. I don't like to make any assumptions about what the purpose of that thing was. I think it's interesting, and I want to investigate it more. But when it comes to Atlantis, like what I'm saying here is I think that we were further along than we gave ourselves credit for, and then a natural disaster wiped us out.
Well, if you think about it, the human species, as it is now, Homo sapiens sapiens, has been on this planet for 300,000 years, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me, bearing in mind that our current understanding of human civilization, at least in the West, is 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Give or take. Maybe 10,000 years at a maximum. Yeah,
10,000 years is about agriculture.
Yeah. But if you're going to extend that to like the absolute... But if you're looking at just agriculture, around 10,000, 11,000 years ago, we have just agriculture. Really? Mm-hmm. As in, we suddenly just have agriculture? Like, we could have...
Well, that's the other thing, is like, is 8,000 BC the dawn of agriculture? Or is it the dawn of agriculture that we've detected? Because people were probably growing home gardens before they were growing fields. So, is it possible that the reason that we think agriculture only started 8,000 years, or in 8,000 BC, is because before that it was too small scale for us to detect with our instruments and with what we can see? You know, if you find a single pottery shard in a field in a layer that dates to 11,600 years ago, does that imply agriculture? We can't really say for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It implies pottery, and our current understanding is that agriculture came before everything else. But there's no certainty with it. So, you know, how likely is it that you're going to find, let's say everybody's farming on 1 acre fields. How likely is it that you're going to find a random 1 acre field?
I mean,
it's not. It's almost impossible. You'd have to find something else. And what's interesting about Gobekli Tepe is we find it, but it's 1,500 years later.
Yep. I mean, even if you're looking at like a technological collapse, I can give you an example of a technological revolution that didn't happen. People don't realize how close Rome was to industrializing. Like,
oh yeah,
and I'm not doing like some
fascinating.
Like,
if you look
they
at
weren't like
if you
2
look
years
at,
off, but they like if they made a couple different tweaks to steam, like some of the steam inventions they had, just a couple different applications, right? If different emperors had come to the power and gone like, this is more interesting, or if they hadn't have collapsed as quickly as they had, Rome was probably 100 or 200 years off of industrializing.
Yeah, well, I mean, they had mills. Yeah, they understood that you could cause something to move by using a system of pulleys. It seems they can't have been that far off from somebody throwing a piece of paper or parchment or something, you know, out into a bathhouse or a feather or something like that, and watching it rise on the steam. Somebody was eventually going to go, hey, I bet we can make something move with steam. It is a little wild to me that after all this time, electricity is still steam power.
Yep.
In most cases. Nuclear power is literally just super hardcore steam power, because you're just boiling water to turn turbines. It's really funny that we figured out the steam engine in the 1700s.
Yep.
Was like the late 1700s when it was starting to be developed.
I think there's very, very basic rudimentary versions in like the late 1600s. Might be a bit earlier. I might be wrong.
Okay, yeah. A steam digester was invented by Dennis Papin sometime between 1647 and 1712. The first pistonless steam engine was patented in July 1968. 1698. So yeah, the late 17th, early 18th century, you start to see steam power. And we've been using that technology now for over 300 years.
Would you for another big leap forward?
Just slightly improving upon it. So you got to wonder, like, were the Romans that far off from figuring that one out? Also, they seem to have, you know, I don't totally understand what the Baghdad battery is. But you know, and also I want to make it clear. I am not an ancient historian. I'm not a prehistorian. I'm a medievalist. My education is from Rome to the Reformation. That is where I consider myself most comfortable. But at the same time, I can use the skills gleaned from that research education to look into other stuff like this, you know? And that's what I've been doing. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything I just said was perfectly 100% accurate. I probably got minor details wrong here and there, but I don't think those minor details add up to the point that you can say I am completely definitively wrong or even likely to be wrong about the Atlantis situation. You know?
I'm just a history buff, so I'm not exactly got amazing credentials. Am I convinced of your Atlantis argument? Well, I will raise you this because you're not convinced of extraterrestrials, which I'm going to bring this in very briefly because we are massively over time, and I know you've got stuff to do. Right, so coming off, and I'm saving my answer on Atlantis for the end because that's what everyone's here for, is my answer on Atlantis. Well, so an ancient civilization, right, and this is gonna sound very similar to Ancient Aliens. Before anyone goes in, it's not. So there is two. Obviously, we know that unless a civilization has cracked FTL travel, hyperspeed, right, which we know is probably billions of years away for us now. It's very hard to get going.
Yeah.
So any race that has come here to explore and examine has probably been here a while. Now, where would be the best place to hide? Well, a lot of UFO sightings happen over water or near cave systems, and throughout many series of folklore, we have like the Celtic otherworld, things coming out of waterways and oceans. We have from Native American folklore all the way to stuff in China, people being scared of caves and underground civilizations. There are also humans who did have underground civilizations. So a collapsing exactly. So a collapsing human civilization, i.e., like maybe something of technological advancement like Atlantis, could live possibly sustainably underground, because while everyone else is resorting to savages, a few people would go underground to stay safe. But we're noping out of this, and eventually, because you've kept the technological advantage, you come out 1,000 years later, everyone else is medieval Europe and the Three Kingdoms period in China and stuff like that, and you're coming out and we'll stay out of this. And by the time you come back out, what happens if you stay underground for long periods of time? Your eyes get bigger. Your skin would become paler because there's less sunlight. What are the descriptions in folklore of all of the uncanny valley stuff? It's creatures with sunken, massive eyes. It's pale-skinned creatures. Their teeth are normally sharp. What's the common description by people who are abducted by aliens? They have paler skin, their eyes are large, and they're normally quite short, right? Now, this is the two hypotheses. I don't believe, if there would be, you can also have that effect by extended space travel, or maybe taller, right? So, which is where you could get different varieties of extraterrestrials. Now, I firmly believe that there is extraterrestrial life, and I firmly believe that it has visited the planet, or it is a form of humans that have gone underground and just observed. Because what would be, if you're that advanced now, what's the point of interacting? If you could destroy the entirety of civilization, enslave everyone at any point, if you're past that, it's like we have no desire to conquer every ant colony on the planet. The ants, ants are quite civilized. In fact, they have wars. Right? That if you get deep into ant society, there is wars between different ant colonies, and it's really interesting to get into. We have no desire to conquer ants. We just sort of let the ants do their thing. If you're an extraterrestrial race, you're just going to glide over it. You're going to be curious, i.e., we take fish out and we tag sharks. That's what the aliens would be doing. They take random humans out, tag them. Again, I'm not doing the ancient astronaut hypothesis because
I know what you're saying.
We don't help ants or orcas to it. There's no point to it. Why would we create another rival, especially one as violent as humans?
We have played around with it a little bit with chimps.
Yeah, but we wouldn't. I mean that's where you get Planet of the Apes from. But that's because they're so close to us, and maybe that's where random technological advancements come from. We just do a little nudge here and there, So that's my two. Maybe aliens are there was also a theory that they're us from the future, but time travel, I feel like we'd be a bit more careful. But yeah, so I would say it's just the study
stuff with space Jews.
Oh no, let's not get into that.
Have you ever seen the spirit science stuff? Their history of the world?
No.
Oh, it's wild. They literally say that the Jews are a separate species, and you're like, huh? Yeah.
Did Kanye invent
It's
this?
wild.
Did Kanye invent?
No,
Yee,
it's some random Canadian dude.
Oh, of course.
I did a live reaction to the whole thing on Twitch, and by the end of it, I wanted to cry. I'm pretty sure it was during the 24-hour stream.
This reminds me of when I was shown the Mormon creation myth and how what happened to the angels who didn't support God and who they became. Google, and I'm not going to say it because YouTube will ban me for saying it. Look up the Mormon creation myth animation. It's on you. I'm saying this to everyone watching as well. It's on YouTube.
I know parts of it.
It's wild.
It's not great.
Do you know
it says some stuff?
So all I'll say to everyone,
take the whole Ham Shem issue and
from what I know, and I'm going to stop it before it gets to a problematic part, is that the angels who supported God became humans, specifically European-looking humans, and the ones who fought against him became demons, and then the ones who remained neutral became another group of humans. And yes, it does get a little bit racist, and that's where I'm going to stop it. Great. I don't know if it is specifically the Mormon myth. I just know that is a version of, because I know there's very different sects of Mormons. So I'm not attacking the Mormon religion. I'm just saying that was a creation myth that had me watching almost as shocked as you and Wendigoon were when you saw the Beyblade lore of Moses potting the Red Sea with Beyblades.
On the one hand, I appreciate it, but I really get the sense Japan does not quite understand Christianity yet.
I mean, they still.
Have you seen the crucified Santa?
Yeah.
It's like you've got all the. It's like they have all the pieces of the puzzle and they have absolutely no clue how to put it together yet.
That's a history episode you should do, actually. How Japan very nearly was Christianized. Like Japan, people don't know, but Japan became very close to being like the eastern spot for Christianity, thanks to Spain. But yeah.
The Buddhists, man, they won.
They won out. It was quite brutal as well. It wasn't very Buddhist-like all the way it was. But before I answer on Atlantis, have I brought you any closer? Have I brought you any closer to aliens?
I like your theory better than the Greys who are coming down and poking us around. I like your theory better. I'm still not sure I buy it. I always see it as like aliens and angels are probably the same thing manifesting. Like when you think
that
about
would make sense. Like if you look at biblically accurate angels, like the big spinning discs, that could very easily be a spaceship. Very easily.
Yeah.
There was actually.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the idea of a divergent species of humans.
I think that's either I think it's. That I think if there is extraterrestrial life, it would either be like something on the dark side of the moon with a moon base, and then coming down regularly, but again, prolonged time in space would cause you to get paler skin, bigger eyes.
Yep.
Or you would have to live underwater or in cave systems, which then ties into the exact same thing, but with a divergent species of humans, which would come to the surface regularly through mountainous cave regions or the ocean. So, like,
and of course, that's the Saskets of British Columbian folklore from the Chehalis people.
I meant to bring this up when I was on the Law Lodge the other week.
Yeah.
The Saskets sound very, very similar to the Nordics, which I don't know if you like deep into the alien stuff. Like the Nordics were basically, you have to be very careful because there was a certain group in World War II that really liked this idea of an alien race.
Are you talking about the Hyperboreans?
Yeah. Right, the type I'm talking about are like the tall greys, essentially. But a certain group in World War II took that and went, they were actually tall, blonde, blue-eyed people who we're all descended from. It's always weird whenever you have this mass-conquering group of people in history.
The funny mustache, man.
It's always weird whenever you have the big evil conquerors in history. They
funny
always...
mustache man and his silly little theories.
Yeah, but it's always funny when the evil conquerors in history always happen to be descended from, like...
They always want to connect themselves to some race of, like, other beings.
Did you it's like Alexander was like meant to be descended from Achilles.
Archie, what are you doing?
Oh, have we lost connection?
Yeah. Viking invaders drew their lineage back to Odin. So there's the Norse did it, the Celts did it, everybody did it. I mean, I think Cuchulainn is supposed to be a
he's descended from Lugh of the Long Hand. Lugh of the Long Hand.
Yeah.
Lug or Lu of the Long Hand. There's
Yeah.
But right, so my answer for Atlantis: am I convinced that Atlantis was real? Well, before we get to that, we'll let you plug your YouTube channel, all of your socials.
Sure. So, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Aidan Mattis. I am the host of The Lore Lodge. It is a channel where we talk about history and folklore and unsolved mysteries and stuff like that. Anything that's a little bit, stuff that toes the line between paranormal and scientifically proven. So that's what we do. And you can find me at The Lore Lodge or at the Aidan Mattis, basically anywhere. Hi, buddy. And if you like coffee, we have a coffee from Tableau Roasting Company. Anyway,
yes, right.
Tableau Roasting Company. It's delicious. It's a medium dark roast. I designed it myself. I used to be a barista. This is Archie. He's our mascot. He's a very good boy. Look at him. Gaze upon his majesty.
This will be 100% on the thumbnail again. Archie always makes me into the thumbnail.
Yeah, that's me.
And you've also got the History Hut
Archie in the thumbnail. Oh yeah, right. We've got new channels too now. The History Hut, the Weird Bible, and Deeper Lore. Deeper Lore is just going to be kind of for skits, Twitch highlights, things like that. History Hut is going to be history content, and the Weird Bible is exactly what it sounds like.
Featuring Wendigoon as well.
Featuring Wendigoon.
See, this is why you need me, the guy in marketing, coming out. I should just run your marketing.
This is the sad part, is I used to be a social media marketing manager.
Yeah, exactly. We had the same job. We pretty much had the same job.
You're just British me.
yeah, genuinely. We're the same height. We pretty much have the same hair color. And I think
similar physical physicality.
I've been on the creatine a bit longer.
Yeah, I got to get back into the gym.
You need to do creatine. Creatine, honestly, the results I've had on creatine. I sound like trying to sell drugs. Creatine, honestly, in the last 3-4 months. Actually, no, I've only been on it 2 months. It's been massive results. Archie looks incredibly uncomfortable. It's like why you do this. Okay, my opinion on Atlantis now. I'm really tempted. I'm really tempted to go to say it and then cut it off. I'm really tempted. All I know is I'll get so many messages being like, answer it if I don't. So anyways, I am hovering over the stop record button because it's so tempting. My view on Atlantis is, I think, now you've said it's not like a hyper flying cars civilization. I believe that there was some concept. I don't believe it was an island that sunk per se. Maybe a coastal city that flooded. And I believe it would probably be in Anatolia. If not, you could actually say that if it was in the Atlantic, past the Pillars of Heracles, you could...
Areas, the Azores.
You possibly could suggest that the reason we didn't actually find any evidence for it would be because they fled west.
The Americas.
Yeah. But again, when you say that...
There would have already been people in the Americas, too.
Yeah. So they would have had... But actually, no. The Spanish and the French and us slightly destroyed a lot of the records that the Aztecs and the Mayans... In fact, the Spanish wiped out most of the Incan system. So, there's... there could be records of, hey, these, random... pale refugees turned up, and
they also might not have been white.
That's true, yeah.
We a lot of people assume that because Atlantis is mentioned by Plato, Atlanteans would have been Caucasian.
They could have been African, quite
not
easily.
Necessarily.
They
could have been from exactly. They could have been African. They could have been Mediterranean. They could have been the same people they could have been Polynesian, for all we know.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's. And then when you look at where the other world is in Irish mythology, and we don't know how far back this even dates, but in a lot of Celtic mythology, the way to get to the other world is sail across the Western Sea.
This action, which would make sense, and also goes into very, very quickly. I know we're extending this. We're way over time. I apologize. When I was doing the Morrigan video, I alluded to this. I believe it was either the fear. I think it's the Fearbulg. The ones that raided specifically came from
the men of the bag.
Might have been. So it was the
people of the sack.
Yes, the Fearbulg, isn't it?
I think so. What are you talking about?
It was either the Fomorians or the Fearbulg. The ones that in the Tuatha De Danann fought against in the second battle, I believe it was. The second.
So the second war between the Tuatha Dé Danann is
the Firbolg, isn't it?
with the Firbolg. Yeah,
Yes,
the first one's
Fomorians
with
are
the
first. Yeah. So I know the dates.
The Firbolg is when the Tuatha Dé Danann go into the other world, and the Firbolg occupy the overworld.
Yeah. So the description I got when I was looking up the Morrigan was that the Firbolg came from the sea to raid, and I've made the joke. I'm not 100% concrete.
That sounds like the Fomorians.
Okay, it might have been from one of those two. The description was they came from the sea to raid, and I jokingly said, and I know the dates wildly do not match up, but I jokingly said that really reminds me of someone, and I just have a little text that comes up that says the sea people, and then goes back down. The text, the dates do not line up at all, but
well, it depends. We don't even know particularly when the Irish got there.
So from what I found, it was like 1800 BCE.
That's one possibility.
Roughly, the Tuatha Dé Danann.
There's also the possibility that it was about 500 BC.
But also.
So no. That's the thing. We get 6 invasions. Well, Nennius only talks about 3 invasions.
Yeah.
Now Nennius is British. He's Celtic. He's Brythonic. He's not Irish. But the Milesians, the people who are the last to be mentioned, it's believed that those are probably the Gaels. And it's thought that they came from Iberia and that they were Celtiberian. So,
which makes sense.
Why would they have gone north? Who knows? But yeah, we are not particularly sure when the Irish when the people we recognize as Irish today, the Gaels, we're not particularly sure when they got to Ireland.
This just goes back to my argument that I'm fairly convinced that the Picts actually were culturally Celtic, culturally Gaelic, but they were also actually descendants from the Beaker people, that they just held out a bit
That is
longer.
one possibility. Also, the likelihood is that every single Celtic person who was born in Britain had
Beaker.
some Beaker.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, no, because the prevailing theory is that they didn't actually, the Beaker people weren't pushed out, they were bred out.
That's probably what happened. It's the same thing we think happened with Neanderthals.
Yeah.
It's probably not that they were all killed off. It's probably that they were close enough.
Unless you're like me and you think they all live in Siberia now. That's my crazy conspiracy theory, which one day I'll open up about when I have more concrete evidence. But anyways, my answer on Atlantis is yes, I do believe that there is possibly some kind. I'm not hyper advanced, but now you've just got to convince Mini Minuteman. He's
supposed to be coming on the show sometime in the next month or so. I got to reach out to him and check, but here's the thing. I think he's gonna kind of
obliterate.
He'll probably be more open-minded to it, but I think his thing is gonna be, well, there's no evidence. Which
he's
I
more archaeology. He's more archaeology side of things, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He's an archaeologist.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think he does strike me as the kind of guy that if someone were to produce evidence of Atlantis, he would probably be the type of guy to look at it and go, all right, we may need to rethink some things. That is my read on Milo. So,
and it would be good, and I recommend. Well,
if a guy named Milo doesn't believe in Atlantis, then it's all lost.
By the time this comes out, you probably will have had him on, or he'll be on like on the Sunday.
I sure hope.
This is. I mean, so I've got because I'm doing a video on. Just recorded a video on the Gilly Do because I realised it's the only one of the 3 wild men I didn't actually have a video on, so I thought I should probably bring it up. And so this should go out January, March, April. This should go out the end of March.
Okay, cool.
This video.
Yeah, I might have had him on by then.
Yeah. So make sure you go over and check that out on the Lore Lodge. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.